All right, this is Andrew Ridgie on Hospitality and Politics, powered by the New York City Hospitality Alliance. I am here with Tom Colicchio, the chef, restaurateur, TV host. You play the guitar or bass?
I play guitar a little bit, yeah.
All right, you got a lot going on.
Yeah.
What is going on in your world? I mean, you do so many things, but right now, where are you
right now,
focused?
The focus, this is probably the first time I'm talking about this publicly. We're working on possibly changing up the concept of craft a little bit. Craft's been open 24 years. As you know, we serve everything family style.
Mm-hmm.
Since the pandemic, people are not sharing. And so, if we have a 16-ounce pork chop on the menu, which is a pretty hefty sized piece of meat, they could share that between 2, possibly 3 people. And yet most people are ordering it, taking it from the center of their table and putting it in front of them, eating the whole thing. Well, the problem with that is now the price of that pork chop is pretty expensive because it feeds 2 to 3 people. But yet people looking at the menu think it's for a single order. And so, a combination of things, I'm kicking around the idea of going to plate it.
Wow.
Which is a big change. I'll still have probably 3 or 4 items that can be shared that are large format.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not completely changing the concept, but I think it, with inflation, with the way things are going up and prices going up, the prices are really expensive on our menu. And, I remember I waded into the debate on social media about congestion pricing.
Yeah.
And people just jumped all over me and then started saying, well, you charge $72 for a duck. What do you, it's like, well, wait a minute. That's for like 2 to 3 people. Yeah. It's not for one person. And that's when I realized I got a problem here. I got to fix this. So that's what's professionally on my mind. Personally, what's on my mind is fishing season's coming up soon. The tuna have arrived and I can't wait to get out there.
There you go. That's exciting. Wow.
Yeah.
I can't believe it's, switching up a restaurant, especially there's such a history that's been around. That's a big move. How's business, just the restaurant business overall from your perspective?
It's not great. Craft since the first of the year we've seen a pretty big drop off. Temple Court, and the Beekman Hotel, that's busy still. Vegas is still busy, but I think it's a combination of things. The other thing, I haven't had a publicist in over 10 years.
Okay.
And so we may be heading I think people need to know we're still there. And, we have a loyal following, but, also our regulars, our clientele is kind of aging out.
Yeah.
And they moved to Palm Beach and they're gone. And so we have to shake it up. And I'm not, it's funny because a lot of my team members are, oh my God, this is such a huge change. I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing wrong with that. The other thing too is because the food at Craft is so simple by design. Yeah. I mean, people forget that I was at Gramercy for 2 years while Craft opened, when Craft opened. So I didn't leave one to go to the other. And at Gramercy, I was doing plated food. It was more what I call high touch food, more, conceptual. And so I purposely did Craft to make it as simple as possible. I mean, literally a piece of fish on a plate with some olive oil and fresh herbs. That was it. Without that project around the corner, I think people are walking and going, this is it?
Yeah.
And so, but the change is fine.
Yeah, no, listen, it's maybe time for a reset. You keep a lot of those core values. But, and listen, not having a publicist, but maybe the change is the opportunity to get out there and start marketing in a different way and bringing new people in. There's just so many places, and especially in that neighborhood. I mean, I was just trying to think from like Union Square up to maybe 28th Street, 5th Avenue, Broadway, Park Avenue South. There have been hundreds of new restaurant seats added over the past couple years of good quality restaurants. So I wonder have you seen that impact? Is it bringing more people to the neighborhood, or is there only so many people to go around?
I think that's part of it. There's a lot more seats now. And I think that's part of it. I think tourism, I'm expecting that's going to drop way off. At least that's what we're hearing. So that I'm worried about that for the summer. I think a lot of other restaurants are worried about that for the summer. But I think the amount of seats I think is an issue, but also, I think being there 24 years, we're not the young restaurant on the block anymore. And we haven't been around, 40 years where we're this, institution yet. And so, it's an awkward age. And, But I'm looking forward to the changes.
Yeah, no, you'll figure it all out. I always, my sense with a lot of this, especially when I talk with restaurateurs, I'm always curious, like what's going on in the state of the industry as they perceive it. And I guess in New York, it's a capital. So like, people are going to go out. There's always going to be the restaurants that are new, that are crushing it, that are always busy. But it's difficult to just be successful and sustain yourself after so many years. And you do need to find ways to just keep the menu fresh, keep people coming in.
Sure. And what happens is since craft has been open, there's a whole new generation of diners that we haven't reached because we're not the new hot restaurant that they're reading about. We're not all over Instagram, we're not all over TikTok, and so we've got to find a way to reach those. What about
just
guests?
The overall operating conditions in New York City versus Vegas? I mean, listen, Vegas is unique, but just what do you see in New York compared to other cities? Is it still the most difficult place to operate?
No, I think Los Angeles is much more difficult to operate. I closed my restaurant in Los Angeles, but that's more because I couldn't work out a deal with the landlord. My lease was up, and but no, I think LA is much more difficult. Yeah. Labor issues are much more stringent, and labor is an issue everywhere. Listen, I'm okay with paying people more money. I have no problem with that, but there has to be a corresponding increase in price. Yeah. There's no way around that.
You even said like the cost, it's just kind of like sticker shock on the menu. And still, it's hard for non-restaurant people to believe, but I still think most restaurant menus, even though they are so expensive, they're probably still underpriced because the cost of the production of putting a restaurant together.
Sure. So I've been around this business 40 plus years now and owned restaurants for 31 years now. And, it used to be back when I had Mondrian back in the late 80s, early 90s, you could run a 34% food cost because rents were cheaper and labor was cheaper. Now, if you don't run a 26, and for those who don't know, I'm not talking about rent. I'm not talking about labor. I'm talking about the cost of food versus what you charge for the food. You used to get away with a 34, 32. Now 26, you can't do it because everything else is more expensive.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard from a lot of full service restaurateurs who are even saying on labor costs as a percent of revenue, it's like 40%.
Yeah.
Some are even pushing it. And rent, forget it. 10% of your sales. And if you're in Manhattan, you have high rent, you could be paying that commercial rent tax, which is, a tax on top of your rent.
Yes.
So there's just so many things I think in New York.
Yeah. You have to pay tax for doing business. You need to pay a tax, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm always just fascinated how much our industry, restaurants, are kind of tied up in politics and these greater societal questions.
Well, that said, if you get rid of the tax credit, you can start sharing those tips. Yeah. But that's a big hit to the restaurateur, and then also front of house doesn't want to do it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, this is a policy issue that I don't think most people think that's connected to policy. A lot of people just kind of go through their day and they complain about it, but they don't realize there's policy around this. Quite frankly, I think, I tried doing away with tips in one meal period. I know Danny Meyer did, and he relented and went back. The only way for it to work is there to be legislation getting rid of tips.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, the people who try it, the only way to make it work is to raise prices. Yeah. You have to raise prices by about 25% to get rid of tips. And then again, someone looks at my menu and it's 25% higher because tips are not necessary anymore. It puts me at a competitive disadvantage. Yeah. So the only way for it to work is really for there to be legislation that goes into policy.
Yeah, it's the value perception. I know Mike Lynn out of Cornell has done some research on this and found that even if people aren't expected to tip, but they see a higher menu price, they'll balk at it because they have a value perception of what a menu item should cost. And maybe they'll order one thing, but instead of a bottle of wine, they each order a glass of wine, split an appetizer instead of each ordering an appetizer.
Again, this is why the only way this works is if there be legislation banning tips.
Yeah.
And there's no choice.
Yeah. And that's why, we've talked about this and got into in the whole issue, with the tip credit in the restaurant industry. But to me, really the issue is tipping or not tipping, because that is what plays into, do you tip people differently based just solely on service or what they look like or what the total check is? There's all these
unfortunately, a lot of people do that.
Into it.
And I've heard these crazy things. Well, I don't tip on wine. Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
God, didn't realize that. I mean, there's a lot of crazy.
Yeah, or it used to be.
Here's the thing that gets me. TIPS is an acronym for to ensure proper service, right? So if you want to ensure proper service, wouldn't you tip the person before the meal starts?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, exactly. You give it. So it is. It's one of those things, and it's just so ingrained in the culture, and there's just so much in it and tied up in it. It's a very difficult and confusing thing. And even, when a lot of the New York, including yourself, or a handful of restaurateurs, moved to eliminate tipping, it became problematic. People left to other restaurants where they still got their tips.
Right.
So it's confusing. On that though, you're out there, you're a public figure. What kind of activated you, got you political? Because I speak with other, there's other, well-known restaurateurs and chefs, but they're not always talking about political issues. And you seem to really embrace it, whether online or TV.
Sure.
Were you always political, or was that just something that, you pushed into?
I grew up in a household where politics was important, local politics, national politics. My father was president of his union. He was a corrections officer. So he was the head of his PBA union.
Wow.
And I know, I remember him campaigning for, there was a guy who was running for sheriff in Union County where he grew up, and he was very active in campaigning for him. I remember going to political fundraisers for the mayor growing up. And so I grew up in a family that talked about politics, focused on politics. And then, when I was able to vote, I, made sure at 18 I was able to vote, and then I got a little bit involved in just the Clinton campaign a little bit, and it was also during that time where that was the first restaurant week.
Yes,
because that we had the convention here in New York, and they were trying to get all the conventioneers to trying to get them decent breaks on some meals. And so, but I remember, I care about the intersection between policy, not so much politics. I care about policy.
Yes.
And I care about good policy that helps people. And so obviously, if you're having that conversation around policy, that goes into politics.
Yes.
But then I got really active after my wife made the film A Place at the Table.
Yeah.
And that was about hunger in America. And very quickly, when she started researching the issue, realized that people in this country aren't hungry because of famine, because of war or drought. They're hungry because we don't have the political will to make sure that we feed hungry people who, for whatever reason, are struggling to feed themselves, feed their families.
Yeah.
And so I co-founded an organization called Food Policy Action. And what we did is we graded Congress on how, we had a scorecard. We graded Congress on how they voted around certain issues, around SNAP benefits and farming and clean water and fishing. And so I was on Capitol Hill, almost once a month. And I called myself an unregistered, unpaid unregistered lobbyist. And I was lobbying on behalf of people who were struggling to feed themselves. And so that put me squarely in the middle of politics and policy. I would go and have, on a typical day, I would go and have probably 12, 14 meeting with members, sometimes meeting with the actual members, sometimes meeting with staffers. And then afterwards, we would always end up at Congresswoman Shelley Pingree house. She's a congresswoman from Maine. She had this great townhouse close on Capitol Hill. And so she would always invite people. And we always had this great turnout. And I always joked around that they probably thought that I was cooking. I never did. And I would go there and address, and it was really interesting back then, and this wasn't that long ago. If 60 people came, 40 were Democrats, 20 were Republicans. Wow. They would show up. They would all hang out afterwards. They'd get in front of the camera. I don't know if it's happening anymore, but they would get, and this, again, wasn't that long ago. They would get in front of the camera and they would say what they had to say, but behind closed doors, they did get together.
I think there needs to be more of that,
I think so too.
the other thing about restaurants, I've always found, the Hospitality Alliance do a lot of advocacy. And
Sure.
There's so many different organizations out there advocating for whatever it is that they're representing, whoever it is they're representing. And I've always just felt fortunate that representing restaurants, nightlife, it's one of those things that just cuts through barriers, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever you are, it's people relate to food. And I feel like when you're sitting down at a table and it's not just in a bright conference room with people, you can kind of cut through the bullshit and you can get to real conversation with people with different opinions. And that's the power of food and hospitality. And I think our government officials these days could stand to benefit quite a bit by getting together around a meal and, agreeing, disagreeing, but, agreeing that it's good to hash this stuff out.
Yeah. I remember the story of hearing, there was a Republican representative from Florida named Sutherland. I'm forgetting his first name. And he got to Congress and he cared about the issue of hunger.
Yeah.
And so he asked someone like, oh, who do I talk to here about this? They said, well, the guy to really talk to was Jim McGovern, a senator from Massachusetts, and congressman from Worcester, Mass, that area. And he's like, well, I was told I can't meet with him. He's a Democrat. And it's just silly.
Have you, restaurateur, chef, TV, all these other things that you're doing, have you ever found that putting yourself out there politically is it benefiting you? Has it harmed you? Because I feel like sometimes people are just concerned about speaking out.
I don't know. Listen, over the years, of course, I've had people go, I'll never go to your restaurant. It's like, you probably weren't going to come anyway, so I'm not worried about it. But no, because listen, I think if you're focused on policy and you're focused on trying to make America better. And not making it personal. Although it's hard with the current president not to make it personal. But I think there's a different level of respect. Plus also, I'm not throwing out ridiculous conspiracy theories and stuff like that. So no, I don't think it's much of a problem. I'm still on TV after all these years and no one's boycotted that. But, and quite frankly, since this last election, I'm doing a little less of it. At least on social media, it's just got ridiculous. But I was on Capitol Hill 3 weeks ago. The Democrats had a hearing around SNAP, and they asked me to attend, and I came and testified.
Okay,
so I'll still do that. And but no, it hasn't. I'm not that worried about it.
Yeah, talk about federal policy. I was just at a dinner, Rethink Food. They've been doing a bunch of food relief and talking about a federal tax credit, not a deduction, but a tax credit of like $50,000 per restaurant for preparing meals for folks in need as a way to support the restaurants, help create sustained jobs.
That's the World Central Kitchen model.
Yes, exactly.
That's it. And, Jose, that's what he's actually been after, a legislation to actually have the restaurants get paid from FEMA.
Yes.
So, because what he's doing is going to an area, if there's a tornado or a hurricane or something like that, finding restaurants that are closed because of the emergency and getting them to open up, and he's paying them $6, $7, $8 a meal. That's the model. And so he went to Congress and said, use this model, let it run through FEMA, and number one, these restaurants can get some money because if they're closed, they can actually get some money, and they know where the people are. And number two, it keeps their people employed. And also, you want to make appropriate meals for the community. It's not just, coming down and feeding them slop. And so that's the model.
The culturally appropriate food is so important.
Thanks for that.
I saw a lot of a lot of that during the pandemic and just in general going to different neighborhoods. And, you have to understand, it's what people are putting in their body, whether for different religious regions, dietary restrictions and stuff that people want to eat. And it also shows people that you care and put some thought into it.
I think it was actually called the CARE Act.
Okay.
I think that was the actual name of it, and I believe it was going through Senator Coons. I think was sponsoring, but I don't think it went anywhere.
Yeah, that's one of those things that I just think needs to cut through all the politics of things, and it's about feeding people. And it's an economic issue because if people need to be fed, it's an unfortunate situation, but that's the reality. If we can support local restaurants, the people they employ, the farmers, that whole economic ecosystem that relies on it.
Oh, it's not only the farmers. It's not only people that provide food. In restaurants, it's the electricians, the plumbers.
Exactly.
People who sell us paper goods. Yeah. People are selling us insurance. Yes. I mean, it's a big ecosystem.
Yeah, no, it really is. It's so part of that economic ecosystem. And then also the social ecosystem and things that happen around, food and, just people, especially when people, if they're out on their luck and, and they need some support, hunger impacts people in so many different ways that it just harms, society, and people can just do more and be better people when they have food.
Sure. I mean, kids going to school who are hungry, they can't learn.
Yeah.
When there was a study done by Deloitte years ago now of kids who got breakfast in first period, not where they had to come in early where there's a stigma to it, but first period, math scores went up by, I think, 16%.
Wow.
The incidence of kids acting up and going to the principal office dropped. Mm-hmm. Absenteeism dropped. And so, there's a lot of benefits, social benefits to feeding people.
Yeah.
If you want everyone in this country to live up to their potential, which is something we need to do to stay competitive in this world, it's in our self-interest to make sure kids are properly nourished.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about kids, we've been doing a lot with what was, Food and Finance High School on the West Side and the Food Education Fund, and really training the future of the industry. And we have our Impact Foundation. We've been doing scholarships. We have some events coming up, to support them. How do you view, I feel like you were talking about cooks and, front of house and different roles and people's kind of upward mobility in the industry. But how do you view kind of the current state of people going into the industry? There's a lot of talk that during the pandemic, we lost a lot of people. We had new people without experience we had to train, or younger people don't want to work, or, they're very fragile and all these different things. And I always trying to figure out, what's the truth more so than the rhetoric? Like, what do you think of the workforce? Because we are so labor intensive.
Sure. So there's a couple, it's a little, a lot to unpack here. So I think young people during the pandemic left the city, and a lot of them didn't come back because, I think if you look at all of the creative arts in the city, we've lost it because an artist can't live here anymore.
Yeah.
A young artist that's struggling now, you can wait tables and things like that. But I know when I started working in New York City in '84, all the artists that worked in the restaurants, they were like squatting in Soho back when you could do that. You can't do that anymore. And so, now it's so expensive that, young cooks are, and because so many chefs have trained in the big cities, whether it's New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, and then they become chefs, they want to have a family, they move back home. They move back home to be with their grandparents, and so there's the larger family that can help raise the kids, and those smaller cities, those secondary and tertiary cities, rents aren't as high, and there's good food everywhere now.
Yes,
you don't have to work in the city anymore.
That's exactly what I was going to say. They maybe lived here and then they went back, and you can have a much different lifestyle.
Yeah.
And that's like the creative class. That creative
lifestyle, you can afford to open a restaurant. It's so hard to open a restaurant here. I mean, to build a new restaurant from scratch. So not a second generation or third generation restaurant. So no infrastructure. It's at least like $12,000 a square foot. I mean, how do you do that?
It's so, I always think hospitality, restaurants, nightlife, culture, all of that stuff is so important to cities because if you get people, they don't go to college, they come here to pursue their dream. They go to college, they come here for their job. And start setting up the future. If you stay here, you can have kids, you can live here, then you get involved in your community boards or on the PTA. Yep. You start caring about the neighborhood, you're paying tax revenue.
Yep.
And it's so important to the future growth and also the foundation. But also I think about like music and culture. And we were just talking about this earlier. Think of like the incredible art and music that came out of New York City, from like, the Ramones and hip hop and Bob Dylan and all of this stuff that came here. It's very difficult to first open a bar or place that are going to host these live music events. And it's difficult to do it in like an authentic, creative way because the barrier for entry is so high.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to nourish and, create opportunity.
I mean, there's still good music venues like Skinny Dennis out in Brooklyn and some places where you can see great live music. And but it's the artist can't live here anymore. If you're a musician, you can fly, you can drive in with the band, set up, perform. Next night you're gone. But if you're going to cook here, or if you want to be a working artist here, or if you're a screenwriter or a writer, you're a playwright, you want to act on Broadway, you have to be here. It's hard.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to spell it. It is.
It's really hard.
It's the cost of living. There still is so much great music, so much great art, all of this stuff. And, it's always like when you're talking about it, nothing was ever as cool now as it was when you were growing up and going through.
No, unfortunately, the only way to afford that as a young person is if your parents are kind of wealthy and they're helping you out. So you don't see, it's the grittiness is gone from New York.
Yeah,
it's not around anymore. I live in Fort Greene. I tell people I live in Fort Greene, like, oh my God, that used to be horrible. It's like, not anymore.
You got great restaurants. It's
amazing restaurants in Fort Greene. I mean, you can't get a townhouse in Bed-Stuy for under $2 million right now. So the city, the grittiness is gone. It's changed, again, going back to Soho in the 80s, it was, I used to go to these parties up in the lofts and stuff, and it was just great, full of artists and, there's a lot of interesting conversation and stuff. Now it's an open air mall.
Yeah, no, it's true. Well, talking about kind of future of the industry and having opportunities. So shows like Top Chef. I guess, people go on the show, they watch it and they're kind of learning from you and the other, chefs and, guests, people that are on the show. What have you learned from, the contestants that come on the show? Are there things that, if someone came on that maybe you didn't think you were going to learn that someone taught you where you're like, oh, wow.
When I learned, it reminds me why I love this industry.
Okay.
When you see a lot of young talent coming up and we cast chefs.
Yeah.
Mostly executive chefs, CDCs, maybe a sous chef. And there's a lot of talent that comes through. And I get to mentor them. I get to give them feedback. My title is a head judge. I'm not judging anything. I'm simply giving them feedback. The way I would give feedback to any of my cooks that present me, or one of my chefs that present me a dish. And, try not to be mean-spirited, try to keep it focused on the food, and try to help them think about food. For them to think the way they want. I don't want anybody to think the way I think about food. I want them to think about it a little deeper. That's all. I want them to go inside and find out what's important to them and find inspiration from, either how they grew up or what's inside of them or what they just really care about. And but yeah, it's that's what I learned from them all the time. Plus I also see a lot of like cool, new techniques, things like that are that I don't practice, but you get to see them and it's like, oh, that's like that. It's interesting.
I love the techniques, but I also love like the personalities. And one of the reasons I always love restaurants is just we have such like unique personalities, and people that go into the business usually, especially if it's like in their DNA or who they are, you have to live and breathe it because it's such a tough industry. So you get characters. Do you get to travel around the country a lot? Do you get to go to a lot of their restaurants ever?
I don't really. I hate to say this. I don't get out much these days. I really don't. It's a remnant from the pandemic. I got used to being home. I hate traveling these days. I still do it when I have to. I don't get out that much.
Okay.
It's every year I say to myself, New Year's resolution, I need to go to like a restaurant once a month. And I just don't. And I feel bad that I don't. And I have friends that open restaurants and I should go and I just don't. So no, I don't really see what they're doing. I'm kind of clueless when it comes to what's going on in the industry, to tell you the truth.
All right. But listen, you do.
I know from my perspective how things land on my organization, but I don't get out there as much as I should.
No, it's tough. I mean, listen, how often are you at the restaurant, in the kitchen?
Most nights.
Okay.
Most days, I should say.
And what's the new, is it Vallata? Did I pronounce it?
Well, Vallata.
That's the newer.
Well, so Vallata was the first location for Craft Bar.
Okay.
And then after we moved Craft Bar, we turned it into our private dining room. And then right before the pandemic, I just finished renovating the private dining room. And that business dried up, so I turned it into a restaurant. Was kind of neat about it is I never had done really Italian food, although Kraft was very Italian, but we never called it an Italian restaurant. And so this is it was like Roman trattoria, and then recently we added sandwiches for lunch only.
Yes,
and it's only sandwiches for lunch, and I'm really happy with the sandwiches. And so that's our thing. But the problem with that restaurant, it still is our private dining room.
Yeah,
and we do a lot of walk-in business. And when walk-in, someone walks in, they walk a couple blocks, and they our door, and we're closed for a private party. They get pissed off at us.
Yeah.
So it's a problem we haven't figured out yet. But no, my office is right above Craft. It's actually right above Vallata, on the 5th floor. And I am usually in the office, and then I'll try to stick around for service at night for a couple hours, and then I'm home. I try to get home by 8:30.
Oh, that's nice. So reasonable.
I like to sit down. Sometimes I'm home earlier. If earlier in the week I'll go home earlier. I try to sit down with my family and have dinner every night.
That's good. It also means that you must empower people in the restaurant to do their job, which is tough for a lot of people to do, to step away.
Absolutely. My executive chef for the company, Brian Hunt, has been with me 14, 15 years now. He did his externship from CIA when I was at Gramercy when I was there. That's how far back he goes. And then he's worked around a bit and then came back. And so, no, I absolutely trust him. Yeah. Also, this is like a young man's job. I can't work service all night anymore. It's like kills me.
It is. It's a tough.
But I'm still like, going through this menu change. I'll probably spend a lot more time there working on menu, because in my, I can sketch stuff out in terms of the dish, but once I start putting it into production, then things change, and little things are added, and I need to be there for that. Yeah.
When you walk into the restaurant, what are you looking for? Like, are there specific things that you're looking for that are functioning the way that you like?
I don't know, but anyone who's worked for me say that I have a sixth sense of walking into a kitchen and always going right to the problem. Like, I'll find it.
Yeah.
not that I'm looking for it, but I'll just like, it's something about it. It's like, I know where it is. It's there. But no, I mean, for me, it's about, looking to see, I look at everybody's mise en place.
Sure.
And I start, trying it. Is the asparagus cooked? Is the sauces? First thing I do if I go into the kitchen right before service, taste all the sauces.
Sure.
Make sure the sauces are right. And I usually head right to the walk-in. I can get a very good sense on what's happening as soon as I walk in the walk-in. You walk in there and go, there's enough oranges and limes here for 5 days. Yeah. We order food every day. Why do you have that much? Because that leads to waste.
Yes, no.
And absolutely. So, but that's what I look for right away.
Cost, yeah. I mean, so much too. I mean, you were mentioning just the cost to run a restaurant is, you can't just be a good cook, good chef, or a hospitable host. You have to be a real business person, because those numbers add up quickly, and with all the other expenses and the laws and regulations.
Right. And to me, that's the biggest problem that I have, because the business side of the brain is different than the creative side of the brain. And you have to be able to switch back and forth between the two. And it's not easy.
Yeah.
And there are times where I try to be creative and it just doesn't come.
Yeah.
And I find it's best to do that, to go home, get out of the restaurant and start working on menus at home.
Yeah.
But no, there's always that thing. You always see it, and you can tell right away. And I know sometimes you open up the, some of the refrigerators are going through, you see the chef, like the cook start to panic a little bit and say, something's wrong here. Let me figure this out. But it's usually not that big of a problem.
Yeah. With all your stuff going on that you have, do you consider, not to pigeonhole you, but like, do you just consider yourself at the core, like you're a cook, you're a chef, now that you've been doing TV or the cookbooks, like how do you, I guess if you could spend most of your time doing one thing, I guess fishing, if it's other than fishing,
go gardening, playing guitar,
me.
Those are the things I do.
Yeah.
And recently I just bought a mandolin, not one of these sliced food on, one you actually play. Okay. Yeah. And I always loved the instrument. I had one years ago. It was a lousy one, so I never played it much, and started taking lessons. And so,
who did I see? Eric repaired.
Vetri plays.
Okay.
No, Eric doesn't play.
No, didn't he? Was he sing? I could have sworn I saw you. Maybe you were playing Vetri. There's someone else. No.
Oh, there's a bunch of people who play.
I thought I saw you. This is like years ago playing with someone. For the life of me, I can't remember where it was.
Maybe Joe Bastianich could have been him.
Could have been.
Years ago, we used to play together. I haven't seen him in ages. Mark Vetri is actually a really good guitar player.
Yeah.
He went to school for music. He didn't go to school for cooking.
Wow.
He went to school for music. Wanted to be a sessions musician, went to LA and couldn't get a gig and started cooking.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, listen, you're still, you're
at heart,
a kitchen.
I'm a cook. It's still, I don't consider myself a musician. I consider myself a cook and restaurateur, I guess. And it's still what I do. And I still enjoy it. 40 years later, I still enjoy it, although it's becoming less enjoyable these days. But no, I still love cooking.
Yeah.
I cook a lot at home these days, and I really enjoy cooking at home. It's a very different animal than cooking in a restaurant. And I like being around food. It's something I've always cared about. Whether it's in a restaurant, whether it's cooking for my family, or whether dinner parties for friends.
There's a social aspect too, I think maybe if people come over, it's just that whole experience.
Well, in my book, Why I Cook,
yes,
the latest book, I owe this book to my publisher for 17 years and just kept putting it off. And when I finally came time to write, it was during the pandemic where I had more time in my hands to actually think about a book, but I was doing these Zoom classes with, corporate clients. And it was like an hour class, but usually it was 20 minutes of cooking and 40 minutes of talking. And they kept asking that question, when did you start cooking? Why do you cook? Things like that. And at first I would give, some stupid answer, just to appease them. And I really started thinking about it. And I kept going back to this moment in time when I was 7, 8 years old, fishing with my grandfather. And, I had 2 jobs when we would go fishing. One was, after we mostly catch crabs and clams.
Okay.
Sometimes fish. But it was my job to prepare everything. So they had that knife in my hand at a very young age and thought that was okay. My second job was on the ride home from Toms River. I grew up in Elizabeth. It's like an hour, 20 minutes from Toms River to Elizabeth. I had to keep my grandfather awake on the ride home. He would nod out in the front seat. And here I am in the front seat, 70s, so no seatbelt. He was a chain
Different
smoker.
World.
And I would have to keep an eye on him. And I'd see him nodding out and I'd nudge him and he'd always wake up and say, I'm not sleeping, I'm just resting my eyes. Yes. We always made it home. But I would go back to this moment in time and think about what those meals were like. Because it was, we would make crab gravy. So we cook the crabs the way you normally cook crabs, take the shell off, crack them in half, put them in marinara sauce, and we call that crab gravy. And then we'd eat that with linguine and then pick through the crabs.
Delicious.
Clams always steamed with, white wine, garlic, parsley, that whole thing. Fish was always battered and fried if we had fish. And then they'd make like this garlic, parsley, hot sauce and pour it over the top. But what really sort of, again, I go back and I remember to think about this, these were big meals. So these weren't just immediate family anymore. This was aunts and uncles and cousins and family friends and 20 or 30 people in these big summer meals around the table. And so somehow that instilled in me that food had the power to bring people around the table. And so that's, I think why I like it.
Yeah.
I also remembered a lot of things I did with my grandfather that I still love today, fishing and gardening. And so, I came to, my grandparents were always they lived right next door to us. So we were, we'd come home for lunch and my grandmother would cook. And my grandmother was, we called it manic depressive back then. Now it's called bipolar.
Yes.
And when she was on a high, boy, we ate really well. We had soups and sandwiches and she'd make pastas and then we'd have cakes. And I mean, it wasn't just one dessert, it was 5. But when she was on a low, we didn't go there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that these moments were, why I cook.
Yeah. That's amazing. The book is beautiful, by the way. I got a copy at the signing when you first the launch, and it's great. It's right up on our table, right by our kitchen. Last thing on the fishing, I've once in a blue, go out. A good childhood friend of mine who actually moved out to California. He's a big fisher, but what is it about fishing that some people, and I feel like you and who else, like Kerry, is out there and I see these catches. What is it about fishing that you feel so connected to? Because you're one of those people that's just passionate. I feel like it's a lifestyle, more than something you just go do once in a while. And I talk about this in a book as well. Most likely I would have been diagnosed with ADHD if they were making those diagnoses
back when I was a kid. All of my children are clinically diagnosed.
Yeah.
They've all had psych evaluations. I see the same issues. But now, what most people equate ADHD with is the hyperactivity and the deficit disorder, right? But there's also the flip side of that is you become hyper-focused on something. It was like that with cooking for me. It was like that with fishing for me. Fishing, whether I'm fly fishing in a stream, where there's a series of problems that you need to solve to get that fly to that trout that it's feeding, and there's nothing around you, the phone's not ringing, you're completely focused on that. So if I'm offshore fishing for tuna, same thing. That's what I'm focused on. I don't go out, people, they think you go out there and drink a bunch of beer and sit there with your pole in your hand. I don't drink when I'm on the boat, and it's very active. But it is a series of problems that you need to figure out. And I become hyper-focused on it, and I just relax. And it's just where I want to be. I mean, for me, if I'm 80 miles offshore when the sun's coming up, that's a great day. It's not a good day. That's a great day.
It's so amazing, talk about mental health, and not me to go on some long rant on that, but same thing. I diagnosed with this and that, and things that are kind of presented as a problem. They're not a problem. You have to redirect them and use them in a way that is, productive and suits your personality. And it's amazing how these things in one context are a problem, but in another context, they're a strength.
At home, we call it a superpower.
It truly
can be a superpower. Is. If you understand it and you learn to harvest it, it can be. My kids now, my 14-year-old, 15-year-old, we've been to the doctor and we treat them, and they're excelling at school where for me, I was always really smart until I hit like third or fourth grade. And then all of a sudden I was dumb. I was like, how did this happen? And then of course I went to Catholic school. So the nuns just were like, I'm just acting up. And, for me, that was my coping mechanism. Especially with things like algebra, I couldn't make heads or tails of it. My 14-year-old is like a math whiz, and so he excels at it. So but we've
and it's putting people and giving kids opportunities.
I'm fortunate enough where I can afford to send them to an ADHD coach that actually once a week makes sure that they're organized, keeps them organized, keeps their day planner organized, and so I figured it out by always having a great assistant who gets me through my day. But the kitchen was a different story. Once I got in the kitchen, hyper-focused. All the frenetic pace of a kitchen actually worked for me. And that just became, that for me, I was able to make sense of that. The faster, crazier it got, the better it was. And where other people will read chaos, I saw absolute clarity. Well,
listen, when you put people in situations that play to their strengths and that interest them, they're going to excel. But when you put somebody in a situation that, they can't sit still, they can't focus on these things, they don't have interest, it just doesn't work. It's like even, with baking, and I come from a baking family, like, I was never a great math person, but when you start baking, you learn about math, when you're working in a kitchen, you learn about discipline and working in a team and all of these things. So that's one of the things I love seeing the students of the Food and Finance High School and everything where, they're not sure exactly what they want to do, but then they learn about food and something just strikes them and they're like, wow. All right. Last thing, I talked about state of the restaurant industry. What do you think's happened in the New York City restaurant industry or just the restaurant industry in large over the next year? Do you think things are going to get better? You think we're still in for a rough patch, or what do you make of it?
I don't know. I don't think we know yet the effects that the tariffs, which are still pretty high, the effect that's going to have. I expect that the China tariffs won't affect food prices, but they will affect equipment. If you go to
and bags so much. I was just talking to a restaurant
paper goods, things like that.
A bunch of places, and they order huge like pallets of to-go bags. And they said, it's more than quadruple or something.
Paper products are going to go up, and so, but we don't know the effect of that because the actual prices haven't been affected yet because I think the stuff now that's arriving in the port are going to carry those tariffs, and so inflation is going to be an issue. And so it's hard to say. If that becomes really sticky, it's going to be tough for a lot of restaurateurs. And so I think that's an issue. I think labor costs are here to stay. They're not going to go down. They never will go down. Food prices, there are tariffs still from Europe, so things like olive oil and stuff like that. And I know someone's going to say, well, you could buy U.S. made olive oil. It's like really expensive.
Yes.
And so I don't know. It's going to be a tough couple of years that we're looking at. It's one of those things where the restaurants that are busy, they're going to be able to absorb it. But you have a restaurant that has Monday, Tuesday it's slow.
Yeah.
All things aren't clicking. It's going to be tough. Hard to say. Rents aren't going to be they're not being any cheaper. And I think the future of restaurants, it's going to be with the chefs and restaurateurs that can get deals from a developer that will build the restaurant.
Yeah. And that's been a huge thing, is the developer money, outside money coming in, allows them to build out these spots and sustain themselves. And they can be the amenity to a hotel, amenity to a big office building.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of these restaurants, a lot of these buildings now, that since the pandemic where people are working from home, they want these Class A buildings. You have to have amenities. And so, we become amenities. Any deal that you look at where they'll build a restaurant, there's another floor somewhere where you're providing amenities. Yeah. But the problem with that is there's only a handful of chefs that get that deal.
Yes.
It's not the young up and coming chef that's going to get that deal. And so it's going to be tough for young people to open restaurants.
All right. On a tasty note, I go to Vallata. I'm going to get a sandwich. What sandwich should I order?
They're all Italian sandwiches. I love the mortadella. We break all the bread ourselves.
Okay.
We make an Italian hero that I think is great. Yeah, I think it's great. Lots of cured meats, some cheeses, a good mixture of cherry peppers and iceberg lettuce, and lots of oil and vinegar, little oregano in there. Yeah, it's good. But there's so many good sandwiches. The mortadella with the stracciatella and pistachio is really good.
I'll just go and order.
We do a steak with pepper jelly that's a lot of arugula watercress. That's pretty exceptional. There's a lot of good sandwiches there.
All right. Yeah, I will go there.
Porchetta with mostarda.
So I was going to go and order one sandwich. Now I'll get those. I'll get a few.
Gotta get a few. Yeah. I'm really happy with them. We can. It's not as busy as I'd like it to be, put it that way. But I'm really proud of what we're doing. Plus, baking our own bread. We got a great pastry team, and I think they're really exceptional.
All right. Well, I'm there. Listen, Tom, thank you for coming on the show. Sure. Thank you for speaking out, speaking your mind, doing all that you do for the industry. It's important for us as a whole.
Well, likewise. Thank you for what you do as well. Makes a big difference.
All right.
Appreciate
Tom Colicchio. We'll talk soon.
Thanks.